Hi, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 3 of My Words, Our Journey. I'm Monty, and today we begin with Chapter 7. Mark has found himself only doing three things these days: trying to keep his commitments made prior to the text, keeping his mental and physical strength for the battle to come, and trying to justify why he hadn't and would not call the police or mention a word of any of the conversations with the killer to anyone. Mentally and physically, he was accomplishing his goal. The gym was his safe haven. Hours spent with loud music in his ears, sweat on his brow, and maximizing his muscles. He had been what most would call a gym rat for years, and with everything going on in his life, he dove in even deeper. Those that knew him thought he was just trying to distract himself. True, but not totally. He had no idea who or what he would face in a short amount of time, and he wanted to be ready, body and mind. Keeping his commitments had been harder. Since his appearance on the Today Show, the first question asked was always, did he really mean what he said about wanting to be face to face with the killer? He had to walk that back a bit, not only because of what he really intended, but also because of his family. They had pretty much insisted he address the comments and make his corrected and hopeful believable beliefs on the subject known. So, at each interview, after he walked it back, said all the right things about rage not being the answer and wanting justice, and that was done only by God and the justice system. And each time the words were spoken, he wanted to throw up in his mouth, because no matter how many times he spoke them, no matter how hard his family wanted them to be true, and even if it was the right way to feel, it was not how Marcus was built, and he would never not want the opportunity to kill the man. Being considered a hero for avenging his sister's murder was only part of it. He would stop the man that either was or could be a serial killer, saving lives. Or he knew there was a chance he would not survive. He had no idea what he'd be facing, but his opponent seemed to know a lot about him. That was one advantage. But the killer also had the element of surprise. Was it worth it? To Marcus, the answer was simple. Yes. The guilt he felt was unbearable. While the wanted to be a hero worked through the scenarios that may present themselves and his rationale for his actions, the killer was deep in his own thoughts as the odometer clicked away the miles. He was not thinking about the killing or the next game. No, he was thinking about the past and how it had shaped him and how he would be portrayed when his finale match was played. He was different, he knew that, not only because he had always been more aware than his peers, but also because he had been told that for most of his life. The name-calling covered all the cruel words children and adults can come up with. His favorite and probably the most accurate was quirky. It fit, but it was also fun to say. He actually had a hat somewhere that had the word in cursive on it. He may have turned out the way he was, with no intervention from fate, or the social and family influences it brought into his life at an early age. His mother and father had split when he was very young, much too early for him to know what really happened. He would hear later that either one or both had cheated, and also that they were fighting all the time. So one night, his dad just walked out. No note, no words, no pat on the head, no nothing. And to this day, he had no idea what happened to his father. He could be dead, could be a billionaire living the high life, or anywhere in between. He had never tried to look for him. In his mind, it would have been plenty easy enough for his dad to find him, if he chose. After his mom was the only one left, and he started to understand what was going on around him, he started to despise the men that she would bring home. None more than Fred. He was not nice to either of them. He acted like his father and the owner of the house from his first visit. Looking back, he knew his mom wasn't attractive, had a low-paying job, and had little to offer a mate. So she had taken what she could get. Unfortunately, Fred had beaten out the rest, and they were also married on his 10th birthday. What he remembered of that day were two things. There were no presents, and none after. And that was the day he also met his stepbrothers, the three boys that, if anything, he blamed, at the least, for his attitude towards women, society, the law, and his overall disdain for anything that conformed to the social norms. He had certainly learned to play the game of life better than most. Jobs, college, clubs, girls, parents, professors, he could fool them all with ease. But in the dark places, the ones only he and God knew about, there were true hatred, which lay waiting. waiting for the time. It all started when the three boys moved in a week after the wedding. Immediately, they took over the house, just like their father had. His stuff became their stuff. His routine did not matter to them, nor his happiness. They were a few years older and much more athletic than he, and they used that to their advantage when Mom and Fred were not home. They would have friends over, and they would drink and play loud music. The girls would join in making fun of him, just like the rest. But it hurt more because he really didn't care what the boys thought. But the girls? He liked girls and wanted them to like him back. He had drifted across the center line and had to be pulled back into his lane to avoid the oncoming traffic. For a few moments, he listened to music before his mind wandered again. So, he had tried to be like the other boys, mean to the girls, obnoxious really. That didn't work either. He was truly alone. It's not like the movies, where the quirky and awkward band together, get the girl, and solve something big. Nope. In his reality, he was alone. Even his mom, who he thought would always be there for him, had forgotten he existed when Fred came into the picture. He had not even gone to her funeral when she had died a few years after the wedding. Fell asleep at the wheel driving home from her second job that Fred had made her get so he could get a bass boat. Fred and his sons did not abandon the boy, however. They had let him stay in the only home he knew. But his mother had left everything she owned to Fred, the house, the car, the little bit of money in her bank account. Nothing for her one and only true son. Nothing but an evil stepfather and his minions. The hate lay dormant until the fire. It could not stay in hiding any longer. If he had tried to fight it, it would have won and devoured him. He knew that to be the indisputable fact. It was a Thursday evening, and the clan had returned from their weekly night out of bowling, the night that he was expected to clean the house, including their bedrooms and their laundry. He had done just that to make sure each room was spotless. Per usual, they were all drunk. Two of them had lady friends with them. Both had been mean to him, so he did not think for a second of abandoning the mission. He would not be under their control and scrutiny one more day. So, when each had passed out in their rooms, he put things into action. Moving furniture, taking pre-screwed boards and covering the windows, finishing the last one as he made his exit. He had started 3 small fires that he knew would certainly do the trick. He had used YouTube to figure out some of what to do. The rest had come from his dark place. As he walked down the street with what he was wearing and a small backpack, he never even turned around, not even with the sounds of sirens or the neighbors yelling. He felt nothing as he stared straight ahead. He would read online in a few days later about the carnage that was found inside the small house, the bodies, the horrible end each must have faced. He knew the police would eventually figure out that they had been murdered, but again, he felt nothing. Whatever happened was already set in motion. He was a small game piece in a much bigger game. Chapter 8. The killer's next destination would be a change of pace. He was headed to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He didn't know anything about the area, but he would bet it'd be much bigger than his previous 2 stops. When he entered the state, he had stopped at the rest area and spent some time stretching his legs and just getting away from the car. He had read that you could not stop in Oklahoma without trying fried steak, grits, and pecan pie. He hadn't had a decent meal in a while since leaving his home, really, and that was going to change, he had decided. So, using his phone, he had picked out a mom-and-pop type restaurant just on the outskirts of town that offered the items mentioned and many other southern favorites. So that is where he was heading. He decided he'd have a nice meal, some quality rest, and be ready for his next adventure in the game tomorrow, bright and early. The website said they would open at 4:30, so he was there right on time. He wasn't trying to avoid a crowd. On the contrary, he was just really hungry. As he was told to seat himself, he noticed her for the first time. If he had a type, she was it. But he tried to brush it off and not look too long in her direction. The restaurant was busier than he figured it would be this early. Must be good, he thought. His waitress turned out to be the brunette he had noticed only moments earlier. His smile and complete stupidity about the menu and Southern cooking must have been enduring because she smiled, laughed, and genuinely seemed pleased to be speaking with him. Her name was Chris. She had been born and raised in the area, a year out of high school, still trying to figure out life. Been there, he thought. Actually, he was still trying. Some would say losing, while others would say he was winning big. None of them mattered. He had been taught through life lessons that the only one you should answer to is yourself. If you can sleep good at night, at the end of the day, none of the other stuff matters. The food was good but heavy. He could now understand why people in the South seemed to be heavier in this part of the country compared to what he was used to. He was sure he'd weigh an extra 20 pounds, if not more, if he had this kind of food at his disposal on a regular basis. Chris checked on him from time to time. Not too much, just enough. She recommended their homemade pecan pie, so while he wasn't much of a pie fan, of course he ordered it. He liked her. She seemed sweet, different than the girls on campus. He hadn't been picked on or made fun of in years, not since he became a man. But he still didn't trust girls. They all wanted something, usually control, he had found. Didn't matter what, just control. But Chris seemed different. So when she brought the check, he laid down the cash and asked when her shift was over. He had noticed no ring, but she could have a boyfriend, so he held his breath waiting for her response. "I take my last table at 7:45 tonight." She smiled and walked away. 7:45 gave him just long enough to get in a power nap. So with that he left, knowing he'd be in the parking lot at 7:45 and would wait until his new friend was off her shift. And at 8:30, Chris came bouncing out the front door. He knew she had seen him sitting alone in the middle of the parking lot, but neither brought up the fact that he had been waiting. As he put down his driver's side window, she leaned down just slightly and asked with the same smile, "You're not a serial killer, are you? I'm asking for a friend." He was not taken back by the question for two reasons. First, she was just so cute. She could have said just about anything, and he would have been mesmerized. And two, he didn't consider himself a serial killer, so the answer was easy. "No, but you and your friend have every right to be concerned about a strange man in a strange car wanting to meet you after work. That's why I thought we could go to the Sonic, then to the park a few blocks over, walk, talk, watch the geese, or all of the above. Of course, that's if it's okay with your friend." Chapter 9. 5 a.m. the next morning came early. He knew it would. He had enjoyed her company, and she must have enjoyed his. He had promised to call in a few days, letting her know when he'd be back in the area. He had been a perfect gentleman. She had been an angel. To the point he had almost forgotten why he was in the area. He had meant what he had said. If he was successful during the events of the game over the next several days, then he would call her. But this morning, he had other priorities. The next phase would begin soon. He had learned that Marcus' best friend from high school lived in Oklahoma City, and that his son worked the early shift at a small market. So, the killer was going shopping. He had to go deep to find this game piece, but it was worth every rabbit hole. As he entered the parking lot, he could see there were already a few customers' vehicles up front, and what he guessed were employees' vehicles on the side. Perfect. Enough to play, but not too many to handle, he thought. Grabbing a basket and deciding that a man looking lost in a market was not unusual, and he would not stand out, he walked the aisles, got a feel for his surroundings, and then approached Tommy, bent down stocking soup cans, with his headphones on. The music was loud, so he had to touch the teen on the shoulder with the barrel of the gun to get his attention. Right index finger to his lips, letting him know not to make a sound. The killer bent down beside the stunned youth and said the words that would begin this phase of the game. "You have 1 minute to pick out 3 people who will be shot dead this morning. If you don't pick 3, I will pick them for you, and then you'll be murdered. You'll be number 4. Your time starts now." Without hesitation, and to the surprise of the killer, the young buck turned off his music, put his headphones in his front right pocket, and began to slowly walk towards the front counter. At which point the killer noticed the security cameras that covered the entire inside and outside of the market. After only a few seconds, he pointed to the outside loading dock where one individual had just lit a cigarette, then to a large woman stocking some frozen vegetables, and finally, after taking a moment to locate a man walking into the restroom to the left of the registers. Without instructing the boy or fear for his safety, the killer moved. He quickly decided the figure on the loading dock should be first. Boom. Then the woman in the frozen section. Boom. That would get everyone's attention, he thought. And finally, the man barreling out of the restroom to see what was going on. Boom. Then he was gone. Had adjusted to ensure there was little for the police to see when they watched the tape back. Back on the road in less than 6 minutes after the game had officially begun. Not bad, he thought. I could do this every day. Before he hit the highway, calls were coming in to the local 911 system. Shots fired at the local market. 3 fatalities. The gunman had gotten away. Tommy sat on the floor next to the video cameras with a look that most would assume was shock. And in fact, Tommy was in shock. Not because of the events of the morning, but because of the events that now would not take place this morning. He thought about how he had prayed to whoever would listen, be it God, the devil, or anything in between that could get him out of the situation he had found himself in. The previous day, he had been caught loading steaks and fresh seafood in the back of his car near the loading dock. Fresh steaks and seafood that he had not paid for, and it was not the first time. But this time he was caught by Mrs. Weatherly, a.k.a. the heavy woman who had only a few minutes earlier been stocking frozen food and now lay dead in aisle 9. She had gone straight to the store manager, Bill something, a.k.a. dead man laying on the loading dock, and he had told the district manager, name unknown, a.k.a. dead man by their bathroom. He was only at the store to fire Tommy this morning and possibly file charges for theft above $500. Tommy had made a deal with whomever would listen to that voice in his head that if he could somehow get out of this situation, he would forever be in their debt. As he pondered that thought, he thought he knew who he owed his debt to, because God probably wouldn't have sent him a murderer to wipe out his problem. Chapter 10. From Oklahoma City, the killer would travel northeast towards Tulsa, then north to the small town of Independence, Kansas, the home of Marcus's and Amber's parents. They had left the small town years ago, and the trip back had become less and less frequent to the point where neither would probably be able to tell you the last time they had been there. The town had not changed much from their last visit, however. Nothing really ever happened in Independence. Just ask the locals, and they'd tell you. If he had anything to say about it, and he believed he did, the killer would be changing that relatively soon. He was really looking forward to this part of the game. If the musclehead had not figured out what was happening yet, this would rattle his brain. He hadn't really done any research on this next stop, but small town was small town. He knew they'd have a Walmart for sleeping, a gas station to prepare his getaway, and fast food for energy. What else could a man want? He had planned his escape, however. He did not want to be anywhere around the area once this one hit. It was late Saturday evening when he pulled into the Walmart parking lot, 2 spots down from the old RV. He would get a good night's sleep before he needed to be at his next stop. The back seat of the car was becoming less comfortable as time went by, but he was managing, and in fact, had gotten the best night's sleep in recent memory. Refreshed and ready, he put the address in the GPS. He wanted to make sure he got a good seat. 10 minutes later, he was sitting in the parking lot, watching as old folks entered the 2 front doors that happened to be propped open. He was watching the side door as well. He did not want to miss his target. A couple minutes later, he was watching her approach the front door at a slow pace. He exited his car and paced himself so he would walk through as she was finding her seat. Perfect. She was a back row kind of gal. He smiled and sat down next to her, surveying the building with a casual glance, but taking in each door. Another small town, and probably every other person here had a gun on them or in their vehicle. Didn't matter. He was the only one that knew that the game was about to begin. That would keep him safe. He had no doubt. As the last few folks took their seats, the piano began to play Amazing Grace, one of his favorites, and a true classic. He felt good this morning. He was pleased to be in church, especially sitting next to Marcus and Amber's grandmother. Was Amber looking down right now? If so, was she screaming for her granny to run? That thought made him happy. The song ended and everyone took a seat. He purposely sat just a little too close. The old woman neither didn't mind or hadn't noticed, because there was no reaction from her. As the man in the suit went through the announcements for the morning, he leaned in close and told the old woman how the game would be played. He repeated the words a second time because he wanted to make sure she understood. When the tear rolled down her cheek and she began looking around the room, he knew he had gotten through. He did have to tell her twice that her time was running out. And to be honest, it was probably more than a minute, probably more like a minute and a half. But the game played on, at which time she extended her grayish arm first towards the preacher, who had now taken his place behind the pulpit, then to the man who had just finished speaking at the front row, and finally to herself. Classy, the killer thought, but not today. Today he wanted her alive to tell her tale. So with his eyes and a slight nod of his head, he told her nice, try again. She reluctantly pointed to the woman sitting at the piano that from his vantage point was probably older than the old woman that sat next to him. Again, without thought, he went to work. First the pastor, one to the head, then the man that had taken a seat next to the front pews, and finally the old woman that was just trying to get away from the piano bench but couldn't. 3 loud booms, 3 more lives taken. He would never be able to explain why, but as he rose to exit, he emptied the gun above the head level, but close enough to keep everyone from thinking about doing anything stupid. It worked, and again the game was leaning in his favor. He had an excitement surging through him as he turned up the music and followed the map on the screen. If everything continued to go as planned, he would be back on the interstate shortly. And we'll end today's episode right there. Thank you as always for listening. I hope each of you are enjoying the journey. And as always, have a great day.